it's fine to rage against the dying of the light and complain about load shedding, but the solution is within our grasp. In order to enable that to happen, we need advocacy and we need intelligent, informed debate. Eskom bashing is a great hobby, and it's clearly a national pastime, but that doesn't solve the problem.
South Africa is enduring a decades-long energy crisis. This is mostly caused by ongoing problems in the country's energy utility, Eskom. Joining me to discuss how we got into this crisis and how to get our way out of it is CEO of Eskom, Mr. André de Ruyter. André de Ruyter, welcome to the show.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
So, André, in December 2019, you were appointed as CEO of Eskom. Why did you take the job, and what conditions did you find the utility in?
So I think the major motivation for me to take the job was probably a dangerous cocktail between patriotism and naive optimism that I could make a contribution. But more seriously, I didn't apply for the job. It was offered to me, and I thought that if I declined the job, then I would really forfeit my right to complain with all the other blokes around the braai. So the idea was to try and make a difference and try and make a contribution. Now, they say that illusion is rapidly dispelled by reality, and that also was true in my case. I visited my first power station, Letabo, which was then regarded as the flagship of Eskom, best performing power station. And the state of neglect was quite dire from what I've been used to in my 30-odd years of visiting plants all over the world. And it was very clear to me that we had an extremely serious challenge with basic disciplines like housekeeping, safety observance, managing basic process parameters. And of course, all of this exacerbated by what I subsequently found in terms of I think, deliberate neglect of our SAP system in order to facilitate corruption and fraud, a complete lack of control over inventory in our warehouses, leading to writing off, for example, of 1.3 billion rand in spares that just weren't there at just one power station. It's really systemic corruption that is still flourishing despite all of our best efforts to combat that. So the challenge, I think, is enormous. We've got a huge backlog in maintenance. Since 2004, more or less, we have run our plants at significantly higher than the best practice for our energy utilization factor. So think of that as your rev counter. So we've run our plants in the red pretty much since 2004, and we haven't maintained them. And as a result, the speed that we're able to extract from our machines, if you think of the rev counter versus the speedometer, we are still running in the red, but our speedometer keeps on declining, and that speedometer is the energy availability factor. So we are producing less and less because of the fact that our plants are old, average age 43 years, if you exclude Medupi and Kusile. And then, of course, in Medupi and Kusile, we have some very serious designed-in and built-in design defects that we now have to correct at great expense. So it's really a question of what could have gone wrong has gone wrong, exacerbated by delayed decisions to build new capacity that we should have done in 1998 when Eskom warned government in an energy white paper, please start building plants. Government, in its wisdom, said, no, that isn't necessary, we'll defer that. So by 2007, when we started to have serious capacity constraints, we then had to play catch up and under some very challenging circumstances. So and we have never caught up with that. And today we have an instantaneous shortfall of 4,000 to 6,000 gigawatts. So that's the equivalent of a Kusile power station that we are missing on the grid. And in order for us to provide for the shutdown schedule that we have for our old plant, we need to build that capacity. We need to add about that capacity to the grid on a continuous basis every year for the next 10 years in order to ensure that we don't run out of capacity again. So we really do find ourselves in a challenging spot at the moment.
Okay, so the immediate short term is that Eskom needs between 4,000 and 6,000 megawatts of additional capacity, but over the longer term, we need about 40 to 50,000 megawatts over about 10 or 15 years or so. That's almost the equivalent of the entire generation capacity of our existing grid, which is about 54,000 megawatts. So how do we go about doing that? What are some of the limitations on that?
Just one data point that I think is very important for the audience to understand is that on average, when you build renewable energy plants, both PV solar as well as wind, you get a load factor relative to your nameplate capacity of about 30%. So if you build a 100 megawatt solar PV plant, you end up with, while the sun shines, typically about 30% of your capacity. And that is purely because these are self-dispatching plants. So when you add 50 gigawatts of capacity, you don't really add 50 gigawatts of coal-fired capacity that is available 24/7. You add 30% of 50 gigawatt, and that is available during certain hours of the day. So in addition to additional generation capacity, we also have to invest in more storage capacity. And that, of course, just exacerbates this challenge. We reckon we need about 4,500 megawatts of storage capacity. These are mega projects by themselves. That'll cost in the order of another 60 to 80 billion just to provide adequate storage. And when you start adding up these numbers, it is clear that neither Eskom nor the state can afford this type of capital program. It's just not, we don't have the wherewithal to do it. Now, fortunately and ironically, we have a great calling card. And that calling card is our carbon footprint. We are one of the biggest carbon emitters on the African continent. We emit in excess of 100 million tons of CO2 per annum. We are responsible for 41% of South Africa's carbon emissions, and we are accountable for roughly 20 to 25% of the total carbon emissions of the African continent. So when we talk to foreign governments who are eager to live up to their Paris commitments, they're eager to facilitate the decarbonization that is necessary for us to combat climate change, then they see Eskom as a very credible counterparty because they have a one-stop shop with a pipeline of plants that are due to be shut down. And of course, we want to pull that forward. We want to accelerate that. So in the roots of our problem as a very coal-dominated utility lie the solution to enable a transition to a lower carbon, greener electricity supply industry in South Africa. And you'll notice that I say it's an industry and it's not Eskom. So we believe that we need to put in place, and you asked about policy conditions, we need to put in place as a country the policy conditions and the structural conditions that will allow and facilitate maximum private sector investment, not only in generation, but also participation in the manufacturing of local goods, because the last thing you want, of course, is for this energy transition, which is inevitable, to be one which exacerbates our current socioeconomic problems of inequality, poverty, and so forth.
All right, but in terms of South Africa's resource endowment, we have a rich supply of coal, particularly concentrated in the east of the country and in Mpumalanga. That strikes me as a strategic advantage that we should be taking advantage of. And And, you know, I would question this aggressive move towards renewables. I think that the question should be not renewables versus traditional energy, but reliables versus unreliables. And there is this problem with solar and wind technology around variability of supply, inconsistency issues, the capital requirements that you highlighted. If foreign DFIs are willing to sponsor that, maybe we can entertain that. But I mean, Eskom in its current position has this 390 billion rand debt profile. For example, if we look at these IPPs, is there any room there for coal providers, you know, the mines and so on, to be using coal technology to meet our energy requirements? Because I think that is the core problem at the moment, is the lack of supply.
In an ideal world where carbon emissions are irrelevant, your argument would be valid. We are increasingly confronted by lenders who have taken an in-principle decision not to fund any further coal projects. Even the Chinese financing institutions have announced that they will not finance any new coal-fired projects. So coal is no longer a fuel that is acceptable to the international financial community. So even if you had the opportunity to build a new coal-fired plant, you wouldn't be able to finance it, and you wouldn't get the environmental approvals, and you would also not get the insurance to make sure that you would be able to continue your running your plant and have it insured at the same time. Now, we can rail against this injustice. We could say, oh, you know, the rich world, they built their economies on coal and we're not allowed to do the same. But bottom line is, having a grudge against reality doesn't help. You need to take account of the facts as they are. Now, there's another very important aspect to this, and that is cost. We are seeing the cost, the levelized cost of electricity for renewables coming in at half of our cash cost of running a almost fully depreciated coal plant. So if you include the full cost of depreciation in your comparison, even with that low load factor, you still have a significant cost advantage over a coal plant. The last major challenge that we've got is that mega projects internationally, but specifically in South Africa, are fraught with execution challenges, and in South Africa, fraught with corruption. And Medupi and Kusile are poster children, if ever you wanted to, for what goes wrong when you have corruption extending its baleful influence over a mega project. Overspent, way behind schedule, and not performing according to expectation. Now, I think that we have a unique opportunity to pivot away from a fossil-based economy to a renewable economy, bearing in mind that as of next year already, the European will be imposing a carbon border tax, which will attribute a carbon footprint to all commodities as well as some agricultural and manufactured goods exported from South Africa. If you talk to some of our car manufacturers, they are desperate to get access to green energy because they are very concerned that their major markets, being the European Union, will, with the imposition of this carbon border tax, make their products uncompetitive. Similarly, aluminium smelters are talking to us and saying they have to compete internationally with smelters based in Iceland using geothermal energy. And the attributed carbon footprint based on the Eskom electricity supply and our own carbon footprint is making their exports of aluminium uncompetitive relative to what can be supplied from renewable energy sources. So it's a challenging debate, but I think we have got to a point where technology has overtaken the resources that we think we have. There's a saying in the energy industry The Stone Age didn't end because of a lack of stones, and the Coal Age won't end because of a lack of coal. Just the fact that we have this resource doesn't mean that we should burn every last lump of coal. On the contrary, I think what we should do is to leverage three other resources. We've got human resources, we've got some of the best renewable energy resources anywhere in the world, and in particular in Mpumalanga, we've got an established transmission grid, and we can provide access to this grid on an almost instantaneous basis. Given the time pressure that we're under, you can also look at the time that it takes to build a coal-fired plant. It's taken us 15 years to complete Medupi. You can bring on a PV plant in 2 years. A wind plant you can bring on in slightly longer, call it 3 years. So if you're in an energy crisis, you do what is required to solve the problem now, not in 15 years' time.
Okay, well, I've often been accused of tilting at windmills, so I think I'm doing the same here today. But, you know, in terms of storage, I mean, you raised this question around the capitalization, the upgrades that are going to be needed for storage. I mean, that seems to me to be not an insignificant stumbling block, and distribution as well. Many of these solar projects are in the Northern Cape. You mentioned in Mpumalanga, where the kind of the existing grid infrastructure is. But if more projects are to come on stream, that's going to require an extension of the grid, which is even more capital intensive. I mean, do we have the resources to invest in that way?
I believe we do. It's going to take time. It's going to take money. And that's part of the reason why we are making available land in Mpumalanga that we own to secure additional private investment to bring capacity onto the grid as soon as possible. It will take about 10 to 15 years to build the 8 to 10,000 kilometers of new transmission line required to connect the best wind and solar acreage to the market. We need to build a further 101 major substations with major transformers. This all takes time, and it takes about 130 billion rand. Now, we don't have 10 to 15 years. We've got load shedding today as we speak. It starts in 22 minutes. And if we want to create energy security, we need to open the floodgates to private investment to bring on as much as possible capacity as soon as possible. That is my firm belief is the answer to solving the electricity crisis that we currently face.
All right, so there have been some significant policy changes over the last year, the lifting of the cap on private energy generation up to 100 megawatts. But there seems to be a lot of red tape. The Minerals Council is complaining that it's very difficult to get environmental approvals. The NERSA application process still has to come, you still need to apply through NERSA for a permit. What's the difference between a permit and a license? And also, why cap it at 100 megawatts? If our needs are so great, why not just lift that cap entirely?
The answer to all those questions is that we should, in my view, I agree with you. I don't see the rationale for capping it at 100 megawatts. There is no restriction on building a manufacturing line for widgets. If a private investor wishes to take risk, well, that's up to him. If he can find a site and he can find utilities and train the necessary staff, he can build a factory as large as he wants to. And then he needs to go out and find a market. And I therefore think that the cap of 100 megawatts is pretty arbitrary, and it could be 1,000. I don't particularly care either way. What I care about is the rapid deployment of additional resources. You talk about NERSA. Now, the current NERSA process for registration is pretty much identical to the licensing process. So it does smack a bit of badge engineering to take one process and say we are liberalizing and then replace it with another process under another name, which is pretty identical. Now, we know the presidency, Operation Vulindlela, is seized with the matter. They are very keen to engage in order to persuade NERSA to really demonstrate that these new plants can be brought onto the grid. But I would agree with the Minerals Council that there is significant appetite amongst industry, mining industry in particular, to bring on the new generation capacity that is required to provide security of electricity supply. And if we can get that security, then we have a fighting chance of getting economic growth. At this point in time, it's pretty clear that the lack of electricity supply security is a brake on further economic growth.
So in terms of governance now, André, there have been a lot of problems that you've highlighted on this platform and elsewhere about corruption, malfeasance, those are well documented. But how much of the governance problems at Eskom are related to BEE requirements in preferential procurement? And there is scope under the Preferential Procurement Act for exemptions, and I know that Eskom has articulated that it would like procurement exceptions. So, I mean, would you think that it would introduce more efficiencies, more transparency if Eskom were to be exempted from these processes?
We have a tendency in South Africa when we design new regulations to add on more and more requirements and initiatives to every bit of legislation and regulation that is designed. And I compare it to a mountaineer who departs on an expedition, and he picks through all the available lightweight equipment that he's got, and he's got a good reason for all of them, and they all make sense individually. But eventually he staggers off to conquer a mountain with 45 kilograms of lightweight equipment on his back. And that makes no sense. I think we as a country need to decide what are our priorities. And then we need to decide what is the simplest way to address the most serious challenge that we face today as an economy, which is the supply of electricity. And if we can solve that as quickly and as efficiently as possible, then we should do so. Interposing non-value adding intermediaries in the process of procurement inflates cost. It introduces additional risk in terms of potential corrupt practices, and it also slows down our supply chains. And I therefore think that there's a good case to be made to streamline procurement processes in order to ensure that we can head off this challenge in the most cost-effective way possible. Bear in mind that electricity is one of the key input costs into essentially any economic activity in the country. If you impose additional costs on the electricity industry, for whatever reason, and it may be very well-intentioned and very noble in its intent, that additional cost is baked into your cost of electricity in perpetuity. And what therefore happens is that if you look at, for example, our local content requirements, we have one operating manufacturer of solar panels. And that manufacturer of solar panels enjoys a very strong protection under our trade policy, so that essentially all government procured solar panels have to be bought from this one supplier. Now, what this means in practice is that there's a premium of between 15 and 20% that we have to pay. And there is also a constraint on the available capacity that this manufacturer has. They've got an installed capacity of manufacturing about 300 megawatts of panels per annum. Now, if we need 6,000 gigawatts, or 6,000 megawatts rather, of capacity, then we had better understand that it's going to take us 20 years to meet the requirement, because we want to give preference to one local supplier that employs a couple of hundred people. What is the greater good? The greater good surely is to have the lowest cost electricity available as soon as possible in the most reliable manner to business and industry, so that we can grow this economy and solve challenges of economic growth and poverty.
Yeah, and it seems to me that Eskom in the past has been treated like a social engineering project rather than an electrical engineering project, trying to address transformation objectives, whereas maybe there's been some scope creep there, losing sight of the core objective, which is to provide energy, as you say. But I just wanted to suggest maybe, I mean, if National Treasury is serious about the energy situation and Eskom were to apply to the office of the Chief Procurement Officer for that exemption, would that be met with understanding and acquiescence on behalf of Treasury?
We've been talking a lot to National Treasury about inefficiencies in procurement introduced by the Public Finance Management Act. Now, the new procurement bill, which seeks to address many of the deficiencies in the PFMA, is mooted to be presented to Parliament imminently. But that has been mooted to be imminent for the past 5 years, as far as I'm told. So one shouldn't perhaps hold one's breath for too long. But it is clear that it's extremely difficult to run a 24/7 industrial enterprise under the constraints of a system that was designed to provide arguably office supplies for government departments. There are fundamental differences in terms of best modern procurement practices. For example, strategic relationships with original equipment manufacturers, the ability to source the lowest prices from low-cost countries in order to ensure that we can get low-cost electricity. All of these policy additions that are laden onto this mountaineer that's trying to scale the mountain, they all add a burden, and they all make you slower, and they make you less efficient and less competitive. And that lack of competitiveness ultimately percolates down to the rest of the economy. And I'm not sure it's always understood. If the policy decision is that this is what we want to do as a country, well, then that's fine. Then that's the democratic government's decision to do that. But I do think that we need to step back and ask ourselves the question, what is the ill that we are trying to cure?
Yeah, and I think that ill fundamentally is a lack of secure energy. So in terms of the policy framework more broadly, I think Eskom is really up against it in a few areas. So the one I would say is in its relationship with municipalities, and the other is rampant criminality. We've seen a number of instances of sabotage happening this week. I know that you're quite reluctant to use the S word, but I think that it's very clear what is happening there. So let's focus on the crime aspect first. Are you getting the necessary support that you need from the South African Police and the National Prosecuting Authority in addressing this rampant sabotage?
The short answer to that is no. We are not getting the necessary support from the South African Police. While we have some good points of contact with the Directorate of Priority Crime Investigations, which is called the Hawks, in other instances, we know that there are people with clear criminal intent who are released the following day on the instructions of senior officers. Now that's a clear indication that there is something awry in our law enforcement system, where we at Tutuka Power Station laid charges against 3 managers who were involved in the theft of 100 million rand per month, only for them to be released on a derisory 500 rand bail. Really is a bit of an insult when we look at the harm that we suffer. Now, I understand people aren't guilty until proven guilty, but surely where someone is accused of such egregious fraudulent activity, 500 rands is what you'd expect for a modest traffic infraction. Never mind stealing 100 million rand a month.
And let's now turn to municipalities. And I think the Eskom's debt that is owed to the utility by municipalities is around 47 billion rand. That's quite a sizable sum. And you are trying to recover some of those outstanding fees. But many of these municipalities are functionally bankrupt. They're no longer really able to meet those obligations. And I know there have been a couple of court cases run by the likes of Sakilicha, for example, where Eskom has cut power to these municipalities, but ratepayers are the ones who end up suffering, even though they're in good standing with the municipality. So, I mean, this strikes me as a bit of an intractable problem. How are you going to go about recovering these outstanding funds and without punishing citizens on the ground who are meeting their obligations?
Fundamentally, I think what we're witnessing is the breakdown of what should be a political process. If your municipality doesn't pay its supplier of electricity, and as a consequence, the supplier of electricity then cuts off supply, which is the normal credit control that we apply to our industrial customers, for example. If South 32 don't pay us, we simply cut them off. And that tends to concentrate their minds very quickly. Not that I'm saying in any way whatsoever that South 32 is not a good payer. They're in fact a very good customer of ours. But with municipalities, there's a different dynamic at play. And we understand that our actions cause hardship to residents who do pay. But then the answer surely is that there should be a democratic process at the ballot box to vote out these councillors who clearly, in many instances, misappropriate funds for their own purposes. If you scan around the room, you will see a substantial number of Louis Vuitton handbags and cell phone covers and other luxury items that I would not buy for myself or for my spouse because it's very, very expensive. So the question is, do we have the political will to solve these problems? Now, one of the reasons why South Africans regard electricity prices as inflated is that some municipalities add a very hefty markup to the tariffs that Eskom charges the municipality. In the case of Salt Plaatje municipality, which is Kimberley, as much as 121% markup. So when people complain about the cost of electricity, yes, in some cases that's true. Now, SALGO, the South African Local Government Association, have recently launched a court case against Eskom, trying to compel Eskom to hand over all distribution to municipalities. Clearly, there is an economic motive at play here because the municipalities want to have access to another source of revenue. But in our view, what's going to happen is that if they are successful in this application, then customers and municipalities are going to end up paying more, which again, you have to ask, is this in the public interest? Now, to resolve this 47 billion rands worth of debt, we are engaging with National Treasury. There is a court case in which the judge, in an obiter remark, so it wasn't a finding in the court case per se, but it was an obiter remark, so it has less of binding power on other courts. He stated that ultimately National Treasury is the debtor of last resort for all government debt, never mind at which level of government it is incurred at. And we, in our discussions with National Treasury, rely on this as an indication that ultimately someone needs to pay for the poor governance that we have seen in these delinquent municipalities. Now, if you look at a municipality like Maluti Apufong, they now owe us in the region of 16.2 billion rand. It is highly unlikely that they will ever have the wherewithal to pay that off. So some sort of bailout is required. Otherwise, Eskom just goes back to National Treasury and says, we need more bailouts from you, National Treasury, because part of government isn't paying us. So we need to solve this problem. It's as you say quite correctly, it is an intractable political issue. It is not a problem that I think will resolve through the courts, or by Eskom's credit actions. It's a problem that requires the cutting of a Gordian knot and some very decisive political action.
Yeah, the problem is that bailouts create moral hazard, that you know that you can get away with that kind of behavior in the future. But, there are more capable municipalities or metros like the city of Cape Town, which are actively looking to procure power. City of Joburg, Mayor Mpho this week at one of the energy endabas was saying that the city wants to spend 24 billion rand on energy. They only have about 8 billion rand for infrastructure generally. So would you lend your support to these cities that are trying to lessen their dependence on Eskom and crowd in private providers?
Absolutely. I think it's great. I think, it may sound strange for me as the chief executive of a utility to actively encourage competition. But my view is that South Africa comes first in this debate. South Africa needs additional electricity as soon as possible. If the metros are able to pursue these projects and get more megawatts on the grid and relieve the pressure on the Eskom generation system, it would be terribly unpatriotic of me to say, but hang on, it's going to cost Eskom money when the country is subjected to load shedding. So we are supportive of it. We will enable it to the extent we can by providing grid connections. We will definitely not put obstacles in the way of metros trying to secure their own energy futures by buying directly from IPPs. And we will wheel this electricity over our grids in order to enable the municipalities to connect to those providers of electricity.
And André, South Africa's nuclear capabilities are small but significant. About 7% of our overall supply is from the nuclear facility in Koeberg. What role do you foresee for nuclear in terms of South Africa's future energy mix? SA has a bit of a bad history with nuclear in the previous administration under President Zuma. But, I would say that could provide a much more consistent, reliable, and high volume energy supply in the future if the right investments were made. Why do we not have those international financiers that you spoke of earlier putting their money behind nuclear, which is a proven technology?
It is a proven technology, and Koeberg is an incredibly competitive plant from a cost of generation perspective. It is our most competitive plant, so it's a great asset. So we are not opposed to nuclear. We like Koeberg, and in fact we are applying for a 20-year extension of its life through the nuclear regulator. However, we do not have the balance sheet to pursue a new project. That is outside of our balance sheet to sustain. We also need to point out that it is highly unlikely that any large new nuclear power plant will be built anywhere in the world using conventional technology. And the reason for that is that these projects are extraordinarily expensive, and they are even more prone to delays and cost overruns than what coal-fired power plants are. I think what we should do as a country is to keep a watching brief on emerging nuclear technologies. If small modular reactors are eventually commercially proven, and I think we're at least a decade away from that, and I think that's definitely an option. And Eskom would very much like to be the operator of such small modular reactors. But I do not think that we should be at the bleeding edge of innovation. We tried that with the pebble bed modular reactor. It ended up costing the country, I think, about 11 billion rands. And we are currently trying to dispose of that plant because it's just costing us money for care and maintenance. So the long and the short of it, nuclear power is great if you've got the asset. To build a new asset is currently unaffordable, is likely to be unaffordable. And again, when you compare it to the time pressure that we've got by which we have to have additional capacity, we don't have 15 years to wait until new nuclear comes online. Even if we start today, it'll take 15 years before that plant becomes operational. So again, even if you are technology agnostic, the time pressure just forces you back to what can we bring on the grid in the shortest possible time to address this challenge.
All right. Well, André, as we close this conversation, I wanted to give you the opportunity for some final remarks to those South Africans who are concerned about the energy security of the country in the near to medium term. What words would you give to them to help them to press forward and to give them a bit of hope?
I think what we need now is advocacy. We need informed, intelligent advocacy to identify some of the obstacles that we have to bringing on significant utility scale capacity to the grid in the shortest possible time. South Africans remind me a lot of Dylan Thomas's poem where he says, rage against the dying of the light in a different context. So it's fine to rage against the dying of the light and complain about load shedding, but the solution is within our grasp. In order to enable that to happen, we need advocacy and we need intelligent, informed debate. Eskom bashing is a great hobby, and it's clearly a national pastime, but that doesn't solve the problem. We need to understand what the obstacles are and lobby and advocate that those obstacles are removed as quickly as possible if we want to solve this crisis.
André de Ruyter, I wanted to thank you very much for coming on the show and for engaging with me so constructively. I certainly hope that Eskom can resolve some of its fundamental problems, but I also hope that other private providers can also start to contribute to the resolution of this crisis.
Thank you very much.
If you're watching on YouTube, please do give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. Also leave your thoughts on this episode down in the comments section. And if you're listening on your preferred podcast platform, please do leave a review there as well. That really helps the show to grow. And if you enjoyed this discussion, you might consider becoming a subscriber to my personal email newsletter that goes out every weekend. There's a link in the description below where you can find out more. My name is David Ansara. This is the Solutions Podcast. Until next time, take care.